Morning, everybody. My favorite song, so it's always nice to start the day with a bit of Kid Rock. So really today we're going to try and think about behavior and mobile and try and see where those intersect and what we can do to understand that topic a bit more. For me, the place to start is that the human mind is a tricky entity. There's been a lot that's been understood about it, but mostly it is a sort of realm of science that has been poorly understood, or we haven't had the foundations to really understand all of it. The principle that is interesting for this slide, I think for me, is that 95% of what we do is subconscious. Breathing, moving, walking, sleeping, answering your cell phone, driving your car. These are things that we all do in a subconscious manner. People always laugh when I say that we drive our car subconsciously. But I think all of us have had at some point driven down a road, gotten to the end of it and thought, did I actually just do that? Did I go past those buildings that I used to go past? So there's a lot of subconscious stuff that we do in all of our behavior. And that comes through as the way we are consumers, the way that we buy into brands, the way that we buy into products, the way we respond to services. When you think about even the notion of walking, we don't tell our legs to walk. We simply move. And this has been interesting research from shopper behavior, where they look at people going into the supermarket and they try to find those same people so they can do some comparative studies on what people do when they go into a shopping environment. And the behaviors are very predictable. People will typically go down the same aisle, they'll stop in the same sorts of areas, and they'll typically reach out to the same levels of the shelf to reach the same type of products. So for a lot of you thinking out there, how do I become my customer's habit and not my customer's choice? What is it that we can do to influence that? Dave Duarte told me I have to pause when I think I say something interesting so that people can tweet it. So thanks for that advice, Dave. I appreciate it. This is a tweet pause right now. But really, that's interesting for me, is how do you try and become someone's habit and not their choice? And what can you do as an organization to shape that? When we think about this concept of rewarding behavior, there are really three segments that typically this can apply to. From a consumer perspective, either from a retailer or from a brand or from a manufacturing company. We know in the pharmaceutical world there are a whole number of behaviors that companies typically want to try and shape, whether it's around selection of medication, whether it's around taking your medication, whether it's about giving feedback post that medication consumption. And then the world of NGOs and not-for-profits. There's some guys at the Broccoli Project here in Cape Town that are doing some really interesting stuff in terms of capturing that behavioral change within the NGO environment. The one I've left off here is education, because I think it's still not quite accepted that you want to be incentivizing certain types of behavior from students, because that's typically the sort of domain of the parents. But you could think about it in the same area when we start to think about which are the areas, which are the behaviors that we want to influence. We've all heard about the carrot and the stick. What is it that gets people to do things? I've got two young kids, and you often find yourself trying to, how do you get people to do things, especially a little 2.5-year-old boy, how do you get him to do stuff that you would like him to do, and you play around with this carrot and the stick. So for today I'm going to leave the stick behind. I'm just going to really talk about this carrot so that we can understand what is an incentive, what is a reward, and why is it that we respond to these things? What is it that's cognitively pre-programmed in our minds to respond to things? Let's just clarify. And there are two parts to this, because a reward and incentive are really two sides of the very same coin. A reward is a positive stimulus that can be presented in the process of reinforcing behavior. Why do people respond to rewards? What is it that is pre-programmed in us that we think, actually, I'm going to respond to this particular reward now because I think there's some value in it for me? This is a behavioral economist, Professor Stephen Landsberg from Rochester University in New York, and his view is that resources are scarce and people respond to incentives. It seems strange when you think of, here's someone offering me an incentive, or here's someone offering me a coupon, or here's offering me something to get my behavior to change. But if you buy into that principle that people have a finite amount of resources that they typically have in their day-to-day lives, it's the nature of human beings to try and expand that set of resources. They want to try and get more of value for themselves, because typically self-interest is something that's pre-programmed in us from our fight or flight survival instincts. How do we really try and maximize our time here and the quality of our time here on this life? people respond to incentives and people respond to different incentives. And that's one of the things that I find exciting in thinking about this concept of shifting behaviors, is what is it that you can do to get that right incentive to match the right behavior that you want. And it may be a short-term behavior change you want. It may be a longer-term behavior. It may be a consistent behavior change. If I'm selling Eloise a maize meal, I may want that person to come in and buy my maize meal every single Thursday of the month, Thursday of the week, last Thursday of the month, whenever people get paid. It's a consistent pattern that I want to get out of my customer. I'm not interested in them buying my product once and a competitor's product once. I really want to make sure they come into the store and they choose to elect my product. I try and reinforce it in a number of ways, and one of those tools that I try and reinforce it is by using incentives. Click. I'm going to put a little video clip on, and I think this is going to help you understand some of the concepts that influence us when we try and respond to incentives and rewards, and then some of the things that maybe don't. So if you've ever come across a guy called Dan Pink, more famous for writing speeches for Al Gore, but he has some interesting insights in terms of human behavior.
Our motivations are unbelievably interesting. I mean, I've been working on this for a few years, and I just find the topic still so amazingly engaging and interesting. So I want to tell you about that. The science is really surprising. The science is a little bit freaky, okay? We are not as endlessly manipulable and as predictable as you would think. There's a whole set of unbelievably interesting studies. I want to give you two that call into question this idea that if you reward something, you get more of the behavior you want. If you punish something, you get less of it. So let's go from London to the mean streets of Cambridge, Massachusetts, in the northeastern part of the United States. And let's talk about a study done at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Here's what they did. They took a whole group of students, and they gave them a set of challenges. Things like memorizing strings of digits, solving word puzzles, other kinds of spatial puzzles, even physical tasks like throwing a ball through a hoop. Okay, they gave them these challenges, and they said to incentivize their performance, they gave them 3 levels of rewards. Okay? So if you did pretty well, you got a small monetary reward. If you did medium well, you got a medium monetary reward. And if you did really well, if you were one of the top performers, you got a large cash prize. Okay? We've seen this movie before. This is essentially a typical motivation scheme within organizations, right? We reward the very top performers, we ignore the low performers, and the other folks kind of in the middle. Okay, you get a little bit. So what happens? They do the test, they have these incentives. Here's what they found out. 1, as long as the task involved only mechanical skill, bonuses worked as they would be expected. The higher the pay, the better their performance. Okay, that makes sense. But here's what happens. But once the task called for even rudimentary cognitive skill, a larger reward led to poorer performance. Now, this is strange, right? A larger reward led to poorer performance? How can that possibly be? Now, what's interesting about this is that these folks here who did this are all economists, 2 at MIT, 1 at the University of Chicago, 1 at Carnegie Mellon, okay, the top tier of the economics profession. And they're reaching this conclusion that seems contrary to what a lot of us learned in economics, which is that the higher the reward, the better their performance. And they're saying that once you get above rudimentary cognitive skill, it's the other way around.
Sorry, that was when you said rewards don't work. I think we missed the last second there. So what's interesting here is he's introduced the concept of really a scientific study to evaluate at what level can you use different approaches to try and get that change in your consumer. And obviously, our historical belief is the deeper the reward or the bigger the reward, the higher chance you're going to get of shifting that behavior to the behavior that you want. On a simple level, it turns out. When you want your customers or your clients or maybe your patients to do particular things, it seems that simplicity is king. If you really want to try and get a complex set of behavioral changes, maybe simply throwing rewards at or incentivizing humans based on this sort of cognitive approach to rewards might not work. So again, I go back to those 3 segments that we're talking about. You know, if we're talking about from a consumer brand perspective, if we're talking about from a medical perspective, from an NGO perspective, one really needs to understand your consumer. One needs to understand your reward set, and you need to try and match those 2. The fact is, and we're going to come into these key measurement terms now, rewards cost money. If I sell that bag of Iwi's Amaze Meal, and I then want to offer a coupon, or I want to offer an airtime incentive, or I want to offer some Mix-It Moolah, or I want to offer M-Pesa, whatever the reward may be to try and get the customer to purchase that product consistently, it costs me money as the organization. That comes off your margin. That affects your GP. So the willy-nilly dishing out of rewards, as we've seen in the historical paper-based solution, where you try and match them, and I'm going to come back to that comparison just now, is difficult because you don't have that data to be able to understand the customer, to know when to reward. So if you don't understand return on investment, it's really something you need to consider when you think, actually, there's a set of behaviors that I want to try and shift. They're measurable behaviors, they're key behaviors for your business or your organization, but you need to understand that it's an expenditure and a return game. And I know ROI is the big term in marketing, and really it's being used because of the digitization of marketing. And as marketing becomes more digital, there's better scope to understand how you spend your money and actually what return you get back. So to get comfortable with that concept, you really have to understand, what is my return on my investment? What is my actual expenditure, all delivered, all in? What is my return on that investment, and how does that potentially chew into my margin? I mean, I often have this discussion with people when they think, well, it's just a once-off campaign. I simply just want to do this once. I want to give away these coupons. Well, the behavior you incentivize is the behavior you get. It's a reality of life. I think Groupon's a great company. I like what they're doing. I see how they're trying to mold a set of relationships between typically merchants and consumers. But I know customers who won't go to that same restaurant unless they get the Groupon deal. That customer has unfortunately adopted the philosophy that I can wait for this deal, and I'm going to wait for the deal. Otherwise, I'm not going to go there and take my girlfriend out for dinner and pay full price. I'm going to wait for that deal. If I don't get the deal, I won't go to dinner. So it really is a key understanding to make sure that whatever you're incentivizing, whatever you think you're doing to your customer, maybe once because it's a good idea, or you wanted to move inventory, or you had a particular need to show an increase in sales figures, you're going to start to cultivate that behavior in your customer. In the medical field, we've also seen some examples where people try and incentivize a certain type of behavior, maybe not at the consumer level, maybe more further up the supply chain between the sort of manufacturers, distributors, and independent medical practitioners. And things can go wrong there because you start to get the wrong behavior because of something that wasn't particularly well thought through. The other term, and I'm a finance person, so I like numbers. I like to understand business in terms of numbers. I like to see the relationship between what's happening and what the numbers are. I often ask people, what's their customer acquisition cost? I've worked in online gaming previously, and I've worked in the health club industry, which has got a very high churn rate. I always want to know what the customer acquisition cost is. What does it cost you to get that customer into your store, or buying your product, or onto your program? And I get this sort of blank look. I don't know what I spend my marketing money and I get this many customers. I'm like, well, you could do a very rough and ready calculation. Take your number of customers that you've acquired and your marketing budget, and you can try and figure out what it costs you to acquire those customers and to see if those are sustainable customers. As your data grows, you can start to figure out, what's my average customer acquisition cost per campaign? What did it cost me to get that customer through different promotional events, different activities, different launching of programs, and start to figure out what your average customer acquisition cost is. And that's why I love AdWords, and I love what Google's done, because you can put in a budget for what it's going to cost to get that click-through onto your page to hopefully achieve your goal of registrations or sign-up or whatever it may be. It's really the discipline of understanding what are those measurement tools that I need to understand before I can start dishing out value to my customers. And really, for me, those three sum it up. It's the summary, the return on investment. What was my investment? What was my return? What am I paying for a customer? And again, I really like the online gaming world, because those guys are very disciplined about how they acquire customers, what their margin is to acquire customers, and what their ability to hang on to those customers is. Oh, sorry. And really, within those three measurements, I think as you unpack the need to try and change your consumer behavior, you need to be thinking along these lines, because you need to think about your costs, you need to think about your return, you need to think about your margin. So in an analog world, there were a couple of constraints when you wanted to incentivize a set of consumer behaviors. First of all, and I'll refer to the paper-based cutout coupon, that concept of dishing out paper-based rewards or value was largely a blind one, or still today is largely a blind one, because there's no medium to know that customer, identify that customer, and reward and try and change that customer's behavior. If you've seen the world of paper-based vouchers and coupons, it's typically been a cut-out newspaper scenario. They stuff them in your doormat. I used to live in New York, and those guys hand out a lot of coupons in the States. Last year in the US, 332 billion coupons were distributed, and 3.2 billion came home. We're dealing in billions, so I'll save you the mental maths. It's 1%. Now, that's a lot of huffing and puffing. That's a lot of printing. That's a lot of intention. But unfortunately, the response rate from the consumer side is very poor. Paper-based coupons are not easy to distribute efficiently. So it's a real constraint in this analog world. The other kind of notion of the passport is that you actually don't know that customer. You can't identify them. They're a cash customer, and they simply have to deal with an unknown customer. That's actually a photograph of a favela in Brazil. I think it's interesting because it's similar to our townships here in South Africa. Shows you that you don't really know where those customers live. There's no medium of identification where somebody lives there. There's no home phone, there's no fax number, there's no mail delivery to that address. And so there's very limited ways that you can actually get to know that customer so that you can start to efficiently reward them. What's nice is in a mobile world, in a digital world, first of all, the reach is fantastic. There's 6 billion mobile phones. You've all heard the stats in South Africa. There are 45, 50 million phones. So you now actually have a device that you can start to use to connect with that customer. You can start to see who that customer is, even if it's just +27 82 555 777. You have an identifier, and that's important. The other thing is we're starting to find the market is you're having a more intelligent point of sale environment. So you can start to reconcile that customer to specifically what they're purchasing in that environment. Which products are they purchasing, specifically with vouchers and coupons? What other products are in their basket? Do you notice that there are diapers and wipes? If they do that consistently, it probably presupposes that there's a child in the household. Have they identified and confirmed that there's a child in that household? So between those two components and now the value of data analytics and the understanding of data sources and quality of data and validity of data, and most importantly, the actionability of data. Once you've now kind of been able to aggregate information around your customer and where they shop and what they purchase, how can you use that to really make it more efficient next time up? And I think that's the key thing for us in this kind of transition from a constraining world, a limited world when you want to reward behavior. You actually now can operate in a world where you have better capability to connect with that customer. You may not know their name, you may not know their surname. They may tell you their name was Donald Duck, but that's fine. You can now start to identify the customer, and you can start to see what that customer is doing. The data analytics are probably a topic that I could spend another 2 hours talking on, because it really is very interesting when it comes to understanding the behavior shifts that you want. But for me, the one takeaway point is that it is based on numbers. If you want to move 4.2 packages per retail distributor per month, and you're currently doing 3.8, and you can quantify what it is you're trying to achieve, you can start to see, again, on those 3 points, what can I invest, what can I give away, what can I discount, what can I promote, to make sure that you're achieving your business goals. In terms of the types of rewards, there are a whole number of things that you can do to try and get that behavioral shift, to try and get that customer movement that you want. Financial rewards are typically cash. You can send that to someone's phone, you can email it them, they can redeem it at different points of interest. We've seen a lot of the financial institutions here that allow you to transfer money. There are FICA considerations, but typically when you look at a financial reward, it ends up being cash in one form or another. We know that from a product-specific level, you want to look at things like vouchers and coupons. What's the ability to use those particular tools to try and get that customer shift on, let's say, a pure product level? I use the word of utility because I think airtime has fantastic utility to customers, and we see very high response rates when you use airtime in a controlled and restricted manner, so you don't give away all your money, because the customers will figure out quite quickly how to steal your money if your systems aren't good. E-currency, there are a bunch of those, from Mixit Moolah and eBucks and M-Pesa. They're starting to become a nice little bouquet that you can consider as a reward type. Electricity is a useful one because the majority of South Africans either have a prepaid electricity or, we're into what, pirate electricity, but typically it's a prepaid electricity box. And again, if you start to understand that that is what that customer values out of the relationship with you, they may do things because you've understood that they, between the 28th of the month and the 30th of the month, if they're going to do anything, they might do it for electricity, because actually that's a utility that they need in their house. It's of value to them. You may not get the same response rate if you give the person a buy one, get one free voucher at that point of the month, because there are actually other more pressing issues that they may be facing, and maybe electricity might be a particularly good reward. We know that lots of customers don't necessarily go into the specific individual accumulation of rewards. Sometimes they just want recognition. Sometimes they want other items like gifts or holidays or expenses, or put me in the famous club, because that'll make me feel good about life. So for those of you who want to understand what it is in terms of how would you experience this as a customer, I'd like you just to, for those of you interested in SMS, the word NP to 33009, or you'll receive some communication back, and it'll start a dialogue, and you'll be able to communicate via a particular survey, which will capture some customer data, and you'll get some corresponding rewards. So again, that's just an option for you to test that. Looking forward, because I see I've got some time constraints here. I think about 2 or 3 minutes, then I'm going to do some questions. Where does this kind of lead to? Where does this kind of tend towards? Now that we've sort of understood the capabilities for what is it that's going to get that behavioral shift that we want, we think that we can start to understand the reward set that might work well for a particular customer group, be it medical, be it consumer, be it NGO. And then where do we go from here? So we've got the building blocks. I think where we go from here is a much more efficient relationship between organizations and a very mass market of individuals. And I really refer to the emerging market like South Africa here, where you have no other identifier on that consumer at a typical relationship. You wouldn't have their ID number, you probably wouldn't have their name, but yet they're consumers of your products. They buy your products and services. So having the ability to understand who they are at a gross level, at a mass level, for me starts to talk about efficiency, where I envisage a world where Unilever may have a relationship with 6 to 10 million South Africans who buy their product. They're now able to engage with those customers. For me, they're actually able to impact supply chain. They're able to impact where your product sits, which products you want to move. How can you push that relationship so it actually has an enormous impact on your business? Right now, supply chains obviously run based on consumer purchasing habits and need for inventory. Is there a way that you can actually start to shift that so that when you're sitting with excess inventory in KZN or excess inventory through this particular retailer, you are able to move that? Now, for me, that's super efficient. That reduces things like holding costs. It reduces inventory costs. It reduces marketing budget, because why do I continue to have to take out billboards that are overpriced and under-deliver? Yes, I'm a huge believer in brand awareness. I don't think you can create a brand without awareness. But I don't think you can only create a business solely based on brand awareness. You need to figure out what your customer acquisition cost is. You need to figure out how is it you can get new customers or hang on to customers or get them to buy more of your product or to be evangelists to sell your product. You only build that sort of set of knowledge and that sort of understanding when you can go directly to the customer. For those of you, and I'm sure there are a bunch of you here in retail and a bunch of you from brand manufacturers, there's a monumental tussle going on between who owns the customer. And to give an example, I live in Hart Bay. There's a Spa, and I go into the Spa, and I go and buy a Pioneer Foods product. Am I a Spa's customer? Yes. Am I a Pioneer Foods customer? Yes. I'm both of their customers, but there's this continual kind of issue around ownership. Who owns that customer? What's the relationship with me and my customer? They call it the mobile shopper marketer. A bit of a tongue twister, but it really helps us understand that this mobility concept can be used by both parties. So maybe they both own the customer. Maybe the customer is not specifically, or I'm not just a Spa customer, or I'm not specifically a Pioneer Foods customer, I'm just a customer. However, it's that kind of umbilical record that I think this digital shift gives us in relationships with our customers and with our patients and with our supporters. But that's the first step. It's how you use it intelligently. And for me, the way forward is largely driven by data and largely driven by understanding of numbers and business goals and strategy and objectives. Once you can start to put those pieces together and you can start to plot what it is that you'd like to achieve and what are your levers for doing that, then I think you've really started to understand the value of rewards. And if that return on investment calculation is not raised solely by finance within your organization, it's actually raised by people who are building these relationships with consumers, I think that's incredibly valuable because it is about data, it is about numbers, it is about money. It's not simply just printing a coupon and putting it on someone's door and hoping that it'll come home. The data proves that that doesn't work.